You're very welcome.
I already knew it's going to be a unique presentation, so thank you again for that. Our next speaker is Laurence Pitt. Laurence is the EMEA Director for Information Security Strategy at Symantec. Responsible for overall strategy and go-to-market across EMEA. Previous to this, he was Product Management Director for Managed Security with Entity Com Security and Endpoint Computing at Novell. Laurence? Okay, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. I get here eventually. There's a saying that we have in the UK, which is break a leg before you go out and do a major presentation. Well, I've already done it, so I'm kind of hoping this is going to go really well this morning. But what I will say is I am certainly not jumping off the stage at any point during this session, so don't get your hopes up. Right, so what I'm going to talk about, however, is new approaches to how we need to look at dealing with emerging threat, both in business and from a personal view here. So, and the interesting thing here is that this isn't a technical conversation. There is a technical angle to it, but it is not a technical conversation because when we're looking at emerging threat, it's not enough just to think about what product am I going to deploy or what signature have I got. We actually have to change how business and IT work together to make them successful. Traditionally, there's been a chasm between the two, and although they talk out of necessity rather than because they actually want to talk. And that has to change. We have to understand that what's happened recently is because of things like Snowden and because of the fact that cyber is now seen as being a very, very major risk, it's very much raised up in the risk register. It's something that now, it makes headline news when this stuff happens. It's out there all the time. It is right up in the risk register. Cyber threat, infrastructure threat is right up in the risk register. And so this means that people in the boardroom are very aware of it. They want to know what's happening. They want to be protected, and they want to be able to understand these conversations. However, on the other side of this, we can move the slide on a little bit. On the IT side, IT has very much been allowed to do its own thing forever, really. As long as IT is successful, the business is relatively happy to carry on funding. But if we look at just changes that are happening, so the fact that we now live in a hyper-connected world where users have an expectation of the latest and the greatest the day after it comes out. Everything is just changing so fast. But then on the other side of that, the people that are trying to get in are finding much newer, much more agile methods of being able to get in. And IT has to be aware of that, has to know how to manage those risks, has to know how to communicate those risks back into the business. So what this means is that cyber risk now is a very, very high priority for the business, and it is closing this chasm, and the business and IT are starting to talk together. And this is because cyber threats themselves are ever evolving. We see this as kind of a cyber fog, really. We know these things are out there, we know this stuff's going on, but there's so much of it happening, we don't necessarily know exactly what, when, how, who it's going to affect, why. The whole thing is just a bit of a blur. And businesses do tend to have really, really good information security strategy these days, so they are looking at security as being something that needs to be addressed. What they're not necessarily doing is taking that to the next level, because, if we just look at last week, for example, so Apple stepped up and they released the new iPhone 6. That will be followed by a whole slew of Android and Windows mobile devices riding on the back of it because they all want to make money. And then wearable tech, Apple released the Apple Watch. And that will also be followed by a whole slew of wearable technology devices from other manufacturers. These themselves, people will expect to be able to use them at work. They'll want to bring that phone in and access corporate email on it and have the information transferred onto their watch so they can look at the watch and take calls and whatever they're doing. This in itself is exposure for the business. And it's something the business needs to be aware of. Do I support this device, or do I actually just say no? And how fast can policy spin up? This then brings us to the fact that we just don't have the skills in business to be able to necessarily support this as fast as people are demanding. The evolution of IT is faster than people are actually able to get the projects to do this. In order to be able to support this, businesses need to start to look at this in a different way. There has to be a transformation. What we have to do is to blow away this fog, and we have to look at how we can start to develop cyber-resilient strategies within business. So instead of just pure information technology, actually looking to the outside, learning from what's happening outside of things, setting baselines to understand how my business looks today, to allow us to develop these new strategies that will enable us to be cyber-resilient in the future. What this does mean is that businesses are having to re-look at how they do things. They're having to, in some cases, entirely reimagine how they look at their security portfolio. And this is a very complex area because as much as we'd like to think we can just wander in and wave a magic wand and everything will be happy, it actually just isn't the case, because the reality of the situation is there is no magic wand. There is nothing that we can do. It's hard work, it's effort, and it's understanding that's going to make this happen. If we take a look at the top left on this slide, incidents will happen. That's a fact. People are going to get into your environment, and if you don't think that's the case, then probably you've come to the wrong conference this week. Everybody, well, how many people? As one person said, hey, they'd never been hacked here, because we all know that it's going on. The flip side of that is that 60% of organizations are now seeing more than 25 incidents actually breaking through in a month. So these are incidents that are getting inside the environment. This isn't the millions of things that are just bashing on the firewall all the time asking to come in. These are the ones that make it in, and some may be little tiny things that don't really do anything, but some could be new and interesting. Some could be the ones that we need to look at. And this is where the challenge is introduced, because within a business, my problem is, as soon as something gets in, I have a timeline to react in. The longer I take to react, the less time I have. Now, we actually talk about this as being left of bang. This is represented by the light in the middle here. The further to the left I am, the more I can do to fix that problem. The further to the right I am, the less I can do, eventually probably just resulting in a rebuild of my environment, a restore of my system, which isn't what I want. However, the reason that I can't react is because I don't necessarily understand what the threat is. If this is emerging, I have to understand what's going on in order to develop a strategy that's going to give me the flexibility to go and fix that problem. And this is a big challenge to the business. And what can I do about this? How can I address this? Because we know that in businesses, it can take over 200 days from a breach occurring before they are even aware of it sometimes. So this thing's happened. It's a problem. It's in the business. And I don't know about it. What we have to do is find a way to introduce a different level of intelligence into business that allows us to move this conversation so much further to the left and become much more reactive in how we're dealing with things. And this is the conversation that we're having, and this is how we're looking at the technology space. And it's slightly different to some of the conversations that we're hearing, because what we're seeing is that businesses traditionally are very much focused on prevent as where they live. If we look at the pillars on this screen, what they're saying is that within business, I want to be able to protect the information that I've got. I want to not allow people to misuse it. I want to prevent stuff from getting out. This is your firewalls. This is your traditional antivirus technology. This is your IPS sitting on the network. This is the stuff that everybody knows and loves. However, the other side of that is that when something happens, my detection time is vastly reduced. And so although I will be able to detect, the likelihood is eventually I'm going to have to implement my recovery plan to get things up and running again. And that's not an ideal scenario to be in. What businesses need to do is to move further to the left here. They need to look at prepare. They need to be able to look at their environment, understand what they have, understand the security posture, the risk within their environment. This enables business to develop a baseline. It enables them to say, okay, this is where I am today. This is my known good. That's probably the best way to think about it. This is my good state, like a snapshot. This is risk management in the business, and it means that now, if something does happen, when something does break through, I'm in a much, much better position to be able to provide a rapid response to that, because all I have to focus on is the difference between known good and now bad. That's it. So instead of having to look at my environment and try to understand where something's changed, I actually know very quickly what's changed, because it's this difference between the two. So I'm very quickly able to get to a point of response planning, understanding what's happening, and then looking to mitigate this situation, fix it for my environment. This is how we can transform the business. This is how businesses can look to transform their cyber strategy and become cyber resilient. However, I'm afraid, as with everything, there is a technical angle to this as well. This really is where things are changing, because things are changing massively in cyber, because the traditional malware writers, they're having to look at new angles because it is much harder to get stuff in. This is just a couple of examples from the last year. These aren't emerging at all. I'm sure everybody's heard of Game Over Zeus and CryptoLocker. However, these two pieces of malware alone are estimated to have raised around $30 million for the people who created them. That's $30 million that just gets cycled straight back into developing fantastic new nefarious threats that we can then roll out to generate more and more money. The criminals are so well funded, they run as businesses themselves. Then we've got the new types of threat to look at, which is where what we're finding is social engineered threats. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on other places. People are developing things. They're going out. I know who you are, where you are. I know your name, your mother's name, your children's name, your date of birth, where you live, where you are today, your photograph you uploaded, your dog's name, your car registration. All of that stuff is pretty good for me to build up a fake profile, link to you, and then use that to get into your business. And that's what we're starting to see. So the next level to this is we have to educate the individuals. Individuals need to know about behavior. The first level is intelligence in authentication. Simple, strong passwords. People don't realize how important that is. Strong password doesn't have to be a combination of hashes and symbols and exclamation marks. It just has to be something that isn't obvious to understand, that does include some strength in it. This is actually a great invention, I think, from the hacker community, because they gave us leet speak that allows us to replace letters with numbers. It allows us to play around with words and create strong passwords which nobody will get. The second level is where the business can start to help, though, because now we're looking at adoption of cloud technology, for example, Salesforce, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. We need to be able to apply a business policy layer of security into this about how people behave. Maybe they don't access it, or maybe we're going to, as a business, encrypt data within that space so that it can't be pulled out easily. Then compliance on devices. We've just talked about everybody getting the new iPhone when it's released on Friday. I'm sure everybody's got one on order. Business needs to be able to protect that device. They need to have compliant policies so that when you do connect to the corporate email, I can't forward documents to my home email address. I can't send things outside. I can't copy things even between applications on that device. That all needs to be in space because the user won't know how to protect themselves. So we have to protect them in as much of a non-draconian way as possible from getting it wrong by accident. And then the final piece is with the whole wearable technology, so Internet of Things, Internet of Machines, whatever we want to call it. All of these devices need to have strong developer APIs to allow us to loop security into that conversation. We need to be able to hook into these devices to protect them wherever they are, so that if people do want to use them, they can use them in a manner that allows them to remain protected. Otherwise, we do get to this situation where as you're walking around, you'll start to see targeted adverts arriving on boards, you'll be getting emails from everywhere, you'll be being hacked on the move if you're not careful. Second level, now I've got the user, I have to protect the business. And this is about unified security. And this is very simple. What this is about is going with solutions that talk to each other. I'm not even saying it has to be single vendor solution. You just need to look at solutions that can communicate. If I'm going to do mobile application management and mobile device management, it needs to talk to my endpoint solution, which needs to be able to talk to my threat gateway, which can update my managed service. That is so important here. And all of those need to talk to other vendor solutions. You've seen announcements in the last week about various vendors, including us and McAfee, starting to cooperate on threat intelligence. This is going to be really important in the future because that's how we're going to get these better understandings to be forewarned of things that are going to happen. I'd like to finish with a quick look at advanced threat, and this is really where the future is going to go, and it's how this needs to sit. So if we have a look here, on the left of the screen, we have our hacker or our person or our website, however we want to look at this. What's going to happen here is the user's going to go out, they're going to access a website, and they're going to download a piece of software. That piece of software comes in, quite happily goes through the firewall, but we don't actually know what it is. It hits the endpoint on the device, it's rejected. I can't run it, it's not whitelisted. However, my firewall looks at this and it thinks, well, I'm going to check that. So this is where, actually, if you look at the various solutions that are out there, our own threat gateway or the products from other vendors which are able to sandbox these applications and look at them from a security point of view. They can say, okay, how does this run? How does this behave? What does it do? That can then be fed back centrally into a managed service. And this is the human element. So now I receive this, and I combine this with information from a global intelligence network, actually information from millions of other customers, other vertical areas, other business areas, other countries, to understand what the situation is here. Is this something that I need to be concerned about? And a lot of this is about pure reputational information. So it's about, I downloaded this file from this website. This file might be fine. However, because I downloaded it from this particular website and it's not come from here and it's in this country, maybe it's bad. Or maybe I'm logged in 2 countries at once and I can't possibly be doing that. That can be flagged back by having the intelligence network behind this, by having people running a service to look at this behind that. Only then can we be definite that, okay, I'm allowed to run this and I can add this to my whitelist. By having solutions which talk to do this, the managed service is now capable of updating the firewall, which can update the endpoint solution, to say, okay, get on with that. I'm happy with that in future. Policy can make those changes, which means that the business only has to look at threats they need to look at. They can prioritize effectively on the threats that they need to look at. And the business itself is much more efficient because they're not running around all over the place trying to deal with things they don't need to deal with. This is how I believe we will be dealing with emerging threats as they come out, with advanced, converged, combined, collaborated, consolidated threat solutions from multiple vendors talking together. And with that, I'd say thank you very much, and I appreciate your time this morning.